My name is Earl McKenna, and I've been walking this earth for 73 years now. Most of those years, I've had salt water in my veins and the rhythm of the tide in my bones. I'm telling you this story because it's time someone knew the truth. Not the version people whisper in taverns, but the real thing. The kind of truth that only comes when a man survives something that should have taken him to the bottom of the ocean. It started on a Tuesday in March of 1982. I remember because that's when the almanac said the moon would be full, and I'd caught the best bluefish of my life the night before on a full moon. I was younger then, 42 years old, strong in the arms, still believed the sea owed me something other than hardship. I had a wife named Margaret back in the cottage, 2 sons working the docks, and a boat I'd built myself called the Constant Heart. She was a beauty, 30 feet of oak and pine, the sail I'd patched 100 times, but still held the wind like a living thing. That morning, I woke before dawn like I always did. The sky was gray, but not the usual gray of New England winters. This was different. The clouds hung low and thick, like someone had pulled them down from heaven itself and wrapped them around the coast. Should have known better. I should have stayed in bed, held Margaret close, and thanked God for another day breathing air instead of seawater. But something pulled at me. I can't explain it better than that. It wasn't hunger for fish, and it wasn't ambition. I had enough money to live quiet. It was like the ocean had sent out a hook, and it had caught something deep in my chest, something older than reason. I told Margaret I'd be back before sunset. She didn't argue, just handed me a cloth with bread and cheese, and her eyes were dark, in a way I didn't understand then but do now. Women know things men don't. They smell danger like animals smell rain. By mid-morning, I was 3 miles out, and the sky had turned a color I'd never seen before. Not quite green, not quite gray. It was like someone had taken the color out of a bruise and spread it across the whole horizon. The wind was calm, almost too calm. The sea was flat as a sheet of black glass. That's when a light far out, maybe 5 miles further, bobbing just above the waterline. It wasn't steady like a lighthouse. It flickered 3 times bright, then dim, bright again. I knew every light on this coast like I knew the line in my own hand. There was nothing out there, nothing but deep water and rocks that had swallowed ships before I was even born. I adjusted my course toward it. I don't know why. Looking back now, I can see the foolishness of it, like it's written on a page. But then, in that moment, with that strange light calling to me, and the sea so still it felt like the world had stopped breathing, I just turned the wheel and let the Constant Heart carry me toward it. As I got closer, I started to see shapes in the water, dark shapes. Pieces. I cut the sail and let the boat drift, and that's when I saw it. A hull, old and barnacled and wrong. It was half submerged, pointing down into the deep like a finger beckoning. The wood was rotted in places, solid in others, and there were ropes still tangled around the mast, frayed and ancient. I knew that ship, or rather, I knew of it. Every fisherman from here to Boston knew the story. The Elizabeth's Prayer, a merchant vessel that set out from Portsmouth 30 years before I was born, 1857 I'm saying, carrying a captain named Nathaniel Thorne and his new bride, Eleanor. They were heading to the Caribbean to start a new life. They never made it. A squall came up, sudden and mean, and the ship went down. All hands lost. The captain's body washed up 3 weeks later near Marblehead. But Eleanor was never found. That was the story everyone told. The sea had taken her. She was at the bottom, 30 fathoms down, in the belly of that wreck. But as I floated there, staring at those ropes and that broken mast, I heard something, a sound singing. No, not singing. Like wind through a canyon, but there was no wind. The air was dead still. And then I heard her voice. It was soft, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the sound of the water and the creak of my own boat like a knife through cloth. It said my name, Earl, just that. But it wasn't my Margaret's voice, and it wasn't anyone I knew. It was something that came from the depths, traveled through the water and up into my bone. I jerked at the wheel and turned the constant heart away from that wreck as fast as the sail could take me. But as I did, I looked back one more time, and I swear on my grave that I saw something white, a hand, maybe, or a piece of cloth, slipped beneath the surface of the black water. The light was gone. The sky was still that bruised color, and as I sailed back toward the coast, the wind finally came. It came hard and fast, like the ocean had been holding it, and finally let it out. By the time I reached the harbor, the day had turned mean. The wind came like something alive. I've been on the water long enough to know the difference between a storm and a warning, and the sky split open, and the rain came down so thick I couldn't see the bow boat. The constant heart pitched and rolled, and I lashed myself to the wheel because I knew that if I went overboard, the sea would keep me this time. The waves grew to mountain, 30 feet high, maybe more. I've seen nor'east would make grown men weep, but this was different. These waves moved like they had intention. They didn't just crash down. They reached for the boat, pulled at the rigging, tried to claw their way aboard like they wanted something specific. Wanted me. I was maybe half a mile from shore when the sky lit up with lightning, and in that flash I saw a coast. But it wasn't the coast I knew. The houses were gone. The lighthouse was gone. There was nothing but water and foam and destruction where Maiden's Point used to be, where the church steeple had stood for 60 years, where my home was. My hands froze on the wheel. That's when I heard it. Not the voice this time, but something else. A sound like the earth was breaking apart. A roar that came from beneath the waves, so deep you didn't hear it with your ears, but with your bones. The water itself seemed to not in wave, but in one single motion, like the whole ocean standing up on its hind leg. I should have died then. By all rights, the constant heart should have gone under, and Earl McKenna should have become another name whispered in the taverns, another story about the sea taking what it wants. But something happened still can't explain. Not even now. Not even after all these years of trying. The water in front of me, directly in front of me, it parted. Not like Moses and the Red Sea. I'm not making a biblical claim here. But the waves, they split apart like something was pushing them aside from below. And in that gap, in that impossible space between two walls of black water, I saw a figure. It was a woman. She was standing on the surface of the water like it was solid ground, and she was looking right at me. Her hair was long and dark and moving like it was underwater, even though it wasn't. Her dress was white. No, it was translucent, like it was made of water itself, like she was made of water and light, and something I don't have words for. And her face, God forgive me, I'll never forget her face. It was beautiful and terrible and sad in a way that made my crack open like ice under a spring sun. She raised her hand and pointed toward me. Then she started walking, not running, walking across the surface of the water, moving toward my boat like she was crossing a field on a clear day. The waves didn't, the rain didn't fall on her. She just walked, steady, and her eye never left mine. I should have been terrified. Part of me was. But another part, the part that's old now, the part that's seen too much, recognized something in her. Recognition, like I was meeting someone I'd been waiting for my whole life without knowing it. The constant heart was being tossed a toy. The mast creaking, the sails were torn to shreds, and water pouring over the... I was going down. There was no question about it. In another minute, maybe two, the boat would slip beneath the surface and take me with it. She was closer now. I could see her clearly despite the storm. She was young, couldn't have been more than 30 when she died. Her eyes were the color of water, the kind of blue-green you see when you dive down and look up at the light from below. There were tears on her, maybe it's brave. With her, it's hard to tell the difference. Take my hand, she said. Her voice, the same as before, wind through a canyon, like the ocean speaking in a woman's tone. But this time, I could understand it perfectly. Every word was clear as a bell. I'm dreaming, I said. Or maybe I just thought it. The storm was so loud I don't know if I... You're not dreaming, she said. You're dying, and I'm offering you a choice. She reached out her hand toward me. It was pale and thin and perfect. I could see through it, almost like it wasn't entirely part of this world. Behind her, the coast was still being destroyed. I could see the water rising higher and higher, swallowing everything. The lighthouse was gone now. The church was gone. The entire town was disappearing under a wave so massive it looked like the sky had fallen down and decided to drown us all. A choice? Come with me, she said, down to the deep, down to where Nathaniel is waiting, down to where we don't have to remember pain anymore, or... She paused, and her expression changed. It became harder, more determined. Or you can live. You can go back to the land and tell them what you've seen. You can tell them that the sea is alive, that it thinks, that it remembers every ship that's sunk, every life it's taken. You can tell them that I've been waiting, that we've all been waiting to be remembered. If I don't come with you, I said, what happens? Then I'll let you go, and the storm will pass, and you'll live, but you'll never be the same. You'll carry this with you forever. You'll know things that other men don't know. And some nights, when the moon is full, the wind is coming off the water, you'll hear me calling your name again. The constant heart pitched violently, and I nearly lost. The water was up to the cabin now. I had seconds, maybe less. I looked, and I thought about Margaret, waiting at home. I thought about sons. I thought about the life I still had left to live, even if it meant carrying this impossible knowledge with me until I died. I reached out, grabbed her hand. It was cold, colder than anything I'd ever touched. It was like grabbing a handful of winter, like touching death itself. But it was also solid, real. I could feel her fingers close around my wrist, and there was strength in that grip, strength and sorrow, and something that might have been love. The moment our skin touched, everything changed. The storm didn't stop, but I did. I froze, suspended in time for what felt like hours, probably only seconds. The rain hung in the air around me like frozen mid-fall. The waves stopped moving. The wind went silent. And in that I could hear the constant heart groaning as the water filled her hull. I could hear the sound of the coast breaking apart. All that stone and wood and mortar crumbling under the weight of the ocean. I could hear the voices of every sailor who'd ever drowned in these waters calling out from the deep. And underneath it all, I could hear her voice, Eleanor's voice, singing something in a language I didn't recognize but understood perfectly. It was a funeral hymn, a love song, a plea for forgiveness. Then she let me go. Time started moving again. I stumbled backward and fell hard against the cabin door. The woman, Eleanor, was backing away at the water, still walking like she was crossing solid ground. Behind her, the massive wave that had been about to destroy my boat began to pull back. The water retreated like it was being swallowed by the earth itself. Remember me, she called as she faded. Remember that we loved. Remember that we were here. And then she was gone. The wave came back down, but it was smaller now, less violent. It hit the constant heart like a punch instead of a killing blow, and somehow, still don't know how, the boat didn't go under. The water drained away. The storm rolled back toward the horizon like it was being pulled by invisible ropes. The rain stopped. The wind died. The sun broke through the clouds like it was being born for the first time. I lay on the deck of my boat, gasping for air, shaking like a man with fever. My hands were burned where Eleanor had touched me, not burned by fire, but marked. There were white handprints on my wrist, like frostbite, except they never faded, not in 70 years, not even now. When I finally got myself together and to sail back to shore, I saw the destruction. Nearly half the coastline was gone. Houses were splinters, the church was a pile of rubble, the lighthouse a broken stump. 17 people dead. 33 missing, the worst storm anyone could remember, and it had lasted less than an hour. But here's the thing that nobody understood, the thing that made them think I'd gone mad when I told them what I'd seen. The wave had come from the water and gone back into the water. It hadn't come from the sea. It hadn't followed the long storm. It was like the ocean itself had risen up and then decided, in that moment when Eleanor touched my hand, that it wasn't ready to take everything yet. Margaret found me on the beach, walking toward her like a ghost. She took one look at my face and knew something had changed. She asked me what happened. I tried to tell her, but the words wouldn't come out right. They sounded crazy, even to my own ears. "What's on your wrist?" she asked, taking my arm. I looked down and saw the handprints. They were fading now, becoming lighter, but they were still there, white against my weathered skin, like a brand, like a mark that said, "This man has seen something. This man knows." "I met someone," I said finally. "Someone who's been waiting a long time to be remembered." Margaret didn't ask me any more questions that day, but she held my hand carefully, not on my wrist, and walked me home. And she kept my secret, even when the other fishermen started asking what really happened out there on the water, even when the priest suggested I'd been touched by demons, even when my own sons looked at me like they weren't sure who I was anymore. But I knew exactly who I was. I was the man who'd been chosen by the sea itself to carry a story nobody would believe, chosen to remember Eleanor. I'm an old man. 73 years have passed since that day in March, and I've spent most of them trying to understand what happened out there on the water. The handprints on my wrist faded after about 10 years, but the memory of them never did. I can still feel the cold of her hand on my skin, still hear the song she was singing when time stood still. Margaret passed away 15 years ago. Cancer took her slow, and in those last weeks, when she was barely able to speak, she asked me one question. "Did you make the right choice?" I told her yes. I told her that I chose to live so I could spend those years with her, raising our sons, watching our grandchildren grow. And she smiled, a tired, sad smile that people get when they know you're lying to make them feel better, but they're grateful for the lie anyway. The truth is more complicated than yes or no. After that storm, I never fished in the same way again. The sea had changed, or maybe I had changed, and everything I did on the water felt like a negotiation with something vast, unknowable. I'd go out in my boat, and I'd feel her presence sometimes, not threatening, but there, watching, waiting for something. I didn't know what. I kept the constant heart going for another 30 years. She was a good boat, held together by habit and stubbornness as much as by wood and nails. My sons wanted me to retire, wanted me to sit in the cottage and watch the grandchildren, but I couldn't do it. Every time I tried to give up the sea, I'd feel something pulling it, not painful, but insistent, like a debt that hadn't been paid. So I kept fishing, and every full moon without fail, I'd sail out to where the Elizabeth's prayer went down. I never found the wreck again. The coordinates didn't make sense, and when I tried to describe the location to other sailors, they'd tell me I was remembering it wrong, that it didn't match any known chart. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew that ship was down there, and I knew that Eleanor was still down there with it. One night, about 15 years ago, so that would have made me 58, I was out on the water during a particularly calm full moon. The sea was like glass, and the stars were so bright they hurt to look at. I was alone, which I often was by then. My sons had their own lives, their own boats, their own reasons to forget about the old man and his obsession. I cut the engine and just sat there floating. And I started to talk out loud to the empty air, the dark water. I told Eleanor about my life. I told her about Margaret, about the good years and the hard years. I told her about my grandsons learning to fish, about watching the world change from horse carriages to automobiles, about electricity coming to the town, and how strange it was to see the lighthouse run on a light bulb instead of a flame. I told her everything I thought a woman might want to know about the life of a man she'd saved, and when I was done, I waited. The water didn't part. There was no vision, no ghostly appearance, but the air changed. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees, and my breath came out in clouds, even though it was a warm June night. The stars seemed to get brighter, and the moon reflected off the water like it was a path of silver. I heard her voice, not through my ears, but through through the part of me that had touched her hand all those years ago. "Thank you," she said, "for remembering." "I don't know what I remember," I said. "I don't know if any of it was real. If any of it actually happened the way I think it did. Does it matter?" Her voice was sad, ancient, and somehow kind. "You survived. You lived. And you carried the knowledge that the world is larger and stranger than most people believe. That's real enough. Why did you choose me? Out of all the sailors on this coast, why did you reach for Earl McKenna?" There was a long silence. The water lapped gently against the side of my boat. In the distance, I could hear the sound of the lighthouse beam sweeping across the darkness. "Because you would remember," she said finally. "Most men forget. They convince themselves it was a dream or madness brought on by fear. But you're the kind of man who holds on to things, who doesn't let go. I needed someone like that. I needed someone to know that Nathaniel and I were real, that our love was real, that we existed, and that we mattered, even if the sea took us away." "Are you at peace?" I asked. "No," she said, and there was something almost like a smile in her voice. "But I'm less alone now, and that's something." After that night, I stopped going out to find her. I'd said what needed to be said, and she'd said what she needed to say. The debt was paid, but I never forgot. How could I? I retired from fishing 5 years ago when my hands got too stiff and my back couldn't take the rocking of the boat in it. I moved to this cottage overlooking the water, and I've spent my time sitting on this porch, watching the sea, thinking about everything it means and everything it takes. People in town know me as the crazy old fisherman who talks about seeing ghosts. The children mock me sometimes, call me Ghost Face Earl, when they think I can't hear. The younger fishermen laugh at the story and tell their own versions, each more exaggerated and ridiculous than the last. None of them understand that I'm not claiming to know what was real and what wasn't. I'm just telling what I experienced. And here's what I've learned in all these years of thinking about it. The line between real and impossible is thinner than most people think. 30 years after that storm, they found something interesting. A historian from Boston came to our town doing research, and he discovered that the Elizabeth's Prayer wasn't lost in 1850 to heaven like everyone thought. There were documents, old merchant records and captain's logs, that showed the ship actually went down in 1856, and the woman aboard wasn't named Eleanor at all. She was named Elizabeth Thorne, the captain's daughter, not his wife. The captain had taken her on the voyage to meet her intended husband in the Caribbean. A love match, the historian said, reading from some old letter. But the captain had written in his own log that he had a terrible feeling about the trip, a sense of doom that he couldn't shake. He should have turned back, but he didn't. Pride, probably, or stubbornness, or the belief that a man can outrun. They all died, and the ship went down in a squall. The bodies were never recovered, except for the captain's, which washed up 3 weeks later. I sat in that historian's office, listening to him read these documents to me, and something shifted in my chest. The name Eleanor had been wrong all along, but the feeling, the present, the sadness, the need to be remembered, that had been absolutely right. "Do you know anything else about the passengers?" I asked him. He shuffled through his papers. "There was a crew of 12, all men, the captain, his daughter, and one young man, a sailor named Jonathan Thorne, the captain's son. He was supposed to marry Elizabeth in the Caribbean. They were going to start a new life together, not husband and wife, not Eleanor and Nathaniel, Elizabeth and Jonathan. The names were different, but the love was the same, the grief the same, the need to be remembered. I thanked the historian and left his office, and I walked down to the harbor and sat by the water for a very long time. Here's what I think, and I've had decades to think about. Eleanor, or Elizabeth, or whatever name she carried in life, came to me that day not because I was special, but because I was willing to listen, because I was willing to believe that the sea could be more than just water, salt, and different, that it could be a place where love persists, even after, that it could be a living thing with memory and tension and the passage to mourn. The storm was real. Half the coast was really destroyed. People really died, but the rest of it, the woman walking on water, the choice I was given, the handprints that never quite faded from my wrist, maybe that was the sea's way of speaking to me in a language I could understand. Maybe that was love reaching across the barrier between the living and the dead, trying to say, I was here. We were here. Please don't forget. And I haven't forgotten. I never could. Last summer, my grandson Tommy came to visit. He's a smart boy, reads a lot, doesn't believe in ghosts or miracles or anything he can't measure with an instrument. He saw me looking out at the water, and he asked me point blank, Grandpa, was it real? Did you really see a ghost? I looked at him for a long time before I answered, and then I said, I saw something. Whether you call it a ghost, a dream, or a message from the sea itself, I don't know. I saw something that changed me forever, and I've spent my life trying to understand it. That part is definitely real. He wasn't satisfied with that answer. He wanted certainty, but certainty is a luxury the sea doesn't offer. The ocean keeps its secrets. It shows you things and then never explains them. It saves your life one day and takes your neighbor's the next, and you're left trying to figure out the pattern, knowing all the while that there is no pattern, just chaos and mercy and the incomprehensible will of something vast. But here's the lesson I've learned, the thing I want to tell you as an old man looking back on a life that's almost over. The sea doesn't owe us explanation. It doesn't owe us certainty or closure or the satisfaction of knowing we understand what happened. All it owes us is the chance to survive and the privilege of carrying our stories forward. Whether those stories are about ghosts or dreams or the simple fact that we lived through something terrible and came out the other side, that's all that matters. That we lived, that we remember, that we tell the story to someone else, so that the people we lost, the things we experienced, don't disappear into the blank vastness of time. Eleanor, Elizabeth, whatever her name was, she's gone now. I feel it. The presence I used to sense when I went out on the water has faded, but that's okay. She got what she wanted. She was remembered. Somewhere out there, in the cold, dark water at the bottom of the Atlantic, I hope she's at peace with her Jonathan, and I hope they know that someone, this old fisherman on the New England coast, carried their sea forward, fused the world. That's what the sea teaches you. If everything that lives deserves remembered, and the act of remembering is the only immortality we have. I'm going to die soon. I can feel it in my bones, the way you can feel a storm coming before it arrives. My heart isn't as strong as it used to be. My lungs make a sound like wind through a canyon when I breathe. It's funny, because that's what her voice sounded like. Maybe that's my sign that it's almost time. But before I go, I wanted to tell this story. I wanted to put it out there into the world so that people would know the sea is alive. It remembers, it grieves, and sometimes, if you're willing to listen and believe in things that can't be explained, it will reach and touch your life in ways that change you forever. That's all I have. That's the story of the storm that took half the coast and the impossible choice I was given. Whether you believe it happened the way I'm telling it or not, that's not really the point. The point is that it happened to me, and I lived, and now you know. and maybe that's enough. The seed doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't require certainty. It only asks that we remember, that we carry forward the stories of those who came before us, those who loved and lost and were swallowed by something greater themselves. The greatest gift we can give to the dead is to refuse to let them be forgotten, to speak their names, to tell their stories. In doing so, we give them a kind of immortality, a way of continuing to exist in the hearts and minds of those who come after. That's how we survive eternity, not through the permanence of stone or metal, but through the fragile, powerful act of remembering. If you've listened this far, I'm grateful. These stories are all I have left to give. If you found something in this tale, a moment of wonder, a question worth asking, a reason to look at the seed differently, then I ask you to do one thing. Share this story with someone else. Subscribe and like this video. Pass it forward, because that's how stories, that's how the dead are remembered. That's how we tell the world we were here, we mattered. Don't forget,